So welcome everybody, or welcome back if you've been on our Zoom events before. I'd like to welcome Tom Reed from the Woodland Trust as well, who'll be telling us all about the ancient tree inventory today. And we'll be looking at how we can map these ancient icons that we have in the UK. And just like to thank the Brecon Beacons National Park and Cliff Bar, who've provided the funding so we can run this and our other talks in the event series that we've been running over the past 8 or so months. So thanks to them for providing the funding that's allowing this talk to go ahead. And they're all about putting wildlife on the map, so making biological records of the wildlife, including trees that you see. And we can see some dots on the map on the right, which are U records, and they're the ones that we hold in our database for the BIS area, which is Powys and the Brecon Beacons National Park. So all these black dots or squares on the map are U tree records that have been made and we have in our database in the last 5 years. So you can see there's quite a few on there, and they're spread out quite a bit through our area. So every time you make a record, it could appear as a dot on the map if we decide to search for U tree records in this case. So it's really, really useful information. And it's really easy to make a biological record. You can see the Lurk Wales app postcard there. And we've also got the iRecord app, both available on Android and iPhones. So that's a really easy way to make a biological record. There are also online recording systems, including iRecord and our own for the BIS area, which we call BIS Wired, the Wildlife Recording Database. And as we'll find out shortly from Tom, for ancient trees, there's the ancient tree inventory, and we'll learn all about how to make records onto that inventory as well. Just a reminder that when you are making a biological record, there's 4 pieces of information that we need, and that's the what, where, when and who. So what you've seen, what wildlife you've seen, where and when you saw it, so a place, a grid reference and a date, and who you are as the recorder. And the apps and the online sites make that really easy because they won't let you submit a record unless you told us or filled in the form with all that information. So just 4 pieces of information, and the apps and online make it really, really easy to do that. So there's lots of ways to get involved in wildlife recording. Our latest BIS 100 challenge, which is, well, I'm describing it as 5 times better than our previous BIS 20 challenges, is an activity that we've launched this year as we celebrate our 20th anniversary. So have a look at our website, bis.org.uk, for all our events, and you can find out about the BIS 100 challenge, a prize-winning challenge where we ask you to make 100 records, wildlife records, in the next couple of months. And that's helping our aim to get 3 million records in the BIS area. So we're kind of approaching 3 million wildlife records, and it'd be good to try and tick over 3 million. And you can help by making wildlife records, and we've got a prize-winning challenge to encourage you to do that. So have a look at that and do take part. If you go to our website, you find some useful information on there, including a Find an Expert tool where you can look at the experts we have listed for the different taxon species groups in the different vice counties in the BIS area. There's a sign-up form for our BIS Bulletin, which is an email newsletter I send out once or twice a month, just detailing all the events and activities going on in our area. And you can see the events, and also there's a link to our YouTube channel where this and our other events will appear, and you can watch back. And of course, we're on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Slightly annoyingly, we've got different usernames for each one. So have a look for us on those and follow us and make comments if you like. And of course, you can also make wildlife records from the sightings and also onto the ancient tree inventory, which we'll find out about today. So lots of ways to get involved. Now, those nearly 3 million records are all contained in the All Wales online database, which we call a DERIN. So the 4 Welsh local environmental record centres all feed their data, wildlife records, into this system called the DERIN. And there's a couple of tools on there that you, as the general public, can use to see what wildlife we've got recorded in your area. So have a look at the DERIN, and one of the most useful ones is the What's in My Area tool, and that will show you all the species records, well, all the species that we've got records for in every 1 kilometre square in Wales. So maybe you want to look at the wildlife that has been recorded in an area where you live. So you can head to the What's in My Area tool, click on the map or write in your postcode, and you'll get a list of all the non-sensitive species. We do keep some information back, sensitive species, for example, bats and some birds of prey. So that's where all the millions of records that we have in Wales are kept. And you can access that in a couple of ways, in the What's in My Area tool and also a distribution map tool of the various species that you might be interested in. So have a look at that as well. And just to let you know, the Biodiversity Information Service covers the Powys and Brecon Beacons area in mid Wales. You can see that outlined in red there, and we're one of 4 local environmental record centres in Wales. We're the only one without any coastline, and we all work collaboratively together and feed all our data into the DERIN, which is the online database, and then we make all that information available to people who need it, for example, for management plans and research, and then planning decisions as well. So it's really useful information, and it's really good to record the wildlife that you see and put it on the map so we know what lives where. And finally, we also support a network of wildlife recorders and encourage new wildlife recorders, maybe such as yourselves, to get involved with the wildlife recording community in Wales. So that's a very brief summary about this and what we do here in the Powys and Brecon Beacons area. So I'm going to stop my screen share now and hand over to Tom, who's kindly come along this afternoon, and he's going to tell us all about the ancient tree inventory and how you can make records and record the ancient and veteran trees that you might come across. Okay, over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thanks so much, everyone, for coming to join us. Can I first check? Can everyone see that screen that I've just shared? Getting a few thumbs up. Great stuff. So, right, my name's Tom Reed, and I work for the Woodland Trust. As Ben says, I'm the Citizen Science Officer, and I've been working at the Trust for just under 2 years now, working on the project. And it's a pleasure to be here to tell you about it and how you can get involved. Just to let you know, I have put a link to this, to the Ancient Tree Inventory website just at the top of this presentation. We can actually make sure this presentation is made available to everyone as well, just so that you've got access to the links that are on this. But yeah, like as Ben said at the start, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and we can cover those towards the end. I'm going to start by just mentioning that the Ancient Tree Inventory, in the background, it sort of started as a project over 16 years ago, as a project called the Ancient Tree Hunt, which was a sort of HLF funded project involving the Tree Register, the Ancient Tree Forum, and the Woodland Trust. And today it still remains a partnership project, and still daily grows as this living database of ancient, veteran, and notable trees. We have an interactive map of special trees that have been recorded across the UK. It has to be said that Wales, in particular, is very under-recorded compared to, say, England. So it's good to actually be doing a talk which is focusing on recording in Wales, as we'd like to see more records there. So nationally, we've got over 170,000 verified records, but that represents just a fraction of the ancient, veteran, notable trees that are out there. It's it's what we call a citizen science project. So it basically means that anyone can contribute to the ancient tree inventory and add a record. And the way it works is we have a team of verifiers that are all volunteers, and they go out to kind of check that the records that have been added are correct, and they will decide whether they are ancient, veteran, or notable. And like I say, they really help to curate that database of special trees. So, but first of all, I suppose I should really explain, well, why do we do this? Well, I'm sure I don't need to say it, but ancient and veteran trees are what you might call irreplaceable. You know, that each one is completely unique. And at the moment, there is actually no formal legal protection specifically for ancient and veteran trees. So whilst the project originally started to try and map and raise awareness about the importance of ancient veteran trees, now there is actually much more of a role for the ancient tree inventory to be used as like a consultation tool. And it's amazing to see the sort of people that request data from us. It's we get a lot of ecological consultants, other environmental recording groups and environmental record centres, and those involved in the planning sector all sort of request access to the ancient tree inventory. So it's amazing to see something that started really as a citizen science project now getting used in the real world. So it's just to say that the records that you do add really help to continue that mission in raising awareness, but also it's a case of documenting an important part of nature that is actually being more recognised now. For anyone who's familiar with the National Planning Policy Framework, you may have spotted that ancient and veteran trees are specifically mentioned in the framework, that that they shouldn't be removed, as a result of any development, that they should be considered and that they are irreplaceable. So that certainly, whilst there's no legal protection for ancient trees at the moment, it's the ancient tree inventory has really helped to get ancient and veteran trees on the agenda more, and it was quite pivotal in helping to make that change to the National Planning Policy Framework back in 2018. So that's kind of what the project seeks to do, and like I say, it's great that we can involve everyone in that journey. So just to broadly outline how the project works in sort of 3 quick steps. Step 1 is that a tree gets recorded to the ancient tree inventory, and it initially appears on our map as a grey icon with a U symbol to say it's unverified. So once that's happened, a volunteer verifier will come along and they'll visit the tree, they'll check the data, and they'll decide if that tree is ancient, veteran, or notable. They may check other things as well, so that they might double check the location, they might take some extra photographs and maybe check the species ID, and check that the girth of the tree has been measured appropriately as well, and that like I say, the basic things like the location are all accurate. So this is because we really want to create a very powerful data set that can be used, like I say, potentially in the planning sector, but also for research projects as well. So that's how our verifier team help. And basically, once they've visited, they will then update the record online, and they'll verify it via the website. And once they've done that, your tree will then appear as an icon with either an A, a V, or an N. So that stands for ancient, veteran, or notable. So that's it in a nutshell. I've already mentioned the terms ancient, veteran, notable, and I think it would make sense at this stage to go into more detail about what those mean. So what do we record? Well, primarily we're particularly interested in ancient and veteran trees. So whilst it's called the ancient tree inventory, it's the ancient group make up actually quite a small proportion of the data that's on there. And when you think of an ancient tree, instantly you think of those huge, like gnarly, decaying specimens like you see on screen, which is this is the Bowthorpe oak. It's one of the largest trees in the UK, and this is in Lincolnshire. So I always make a start by saying, you know, the trees that you're likely to find are probably not going to look like this. This actually represents those trees that are on the, you know, the upper end of the scale of the ancient category. They're the ones that have survived for, you know, potentially over 1,000 years, this particular oak. And you know, very few trees make it to being that age. So we're gonna show some sort of examples of trees that you might be more likely to find as well. But I just thought it was worth highlighting, you know, what is to be enjoyed at the upper end of that ancient scale. So just to give a quick overview of the ancient phase and to kind of set the difference between ancient and veteran, we've got a diagram on screen which outlines the kind of life stage of an ancient tree, well, of a tree through its whole life, basically. And you can see it's divided into three broad sections. You've got the young phase, the mature phase, and the ancient phase. So the ancient phase is by far the longest. It's the third and final life stage of a tree, and it can last for hundreds of years. You know, a tree can become sort of young and mature relatively quickly compared to how long it takes for that tree to decay and age throughout the ancient phase. So in terms of how we define an ancient tree, we say that it's one that has passed beyond maturity and is old or aged in comparison with other trees of the same species. I'm going to explain more about why it's important to only compare members of the same species later on. But as you can see from the diagram, generally ancient trees are those which have become like broader in appearance. So they'll feature like a broader girth, and you'll start to see increasing levels of deadwood in the canopy, and things like hollowing in the trunk, very important and a strong indicator of the ancient phase. And so basically what happens in a tree's life is that once it passes maturity, it starts to naturally retrench. So some may have already heard the word retrenchment. It basically describes the process where a tree starts to shed its upper branches. It basically has to rebalance itself with the root system. So it's in its earlier stages of its life, it's grown to becoming a mature tree, and now to kind of rebalance itself with its root system, it starts to lose some of the upper canopy from the main stem, and the tree starts to depend more on the kind of more subordinate stems, which become eventually more dominant. And as that, you can almost see here the tree is growing down, is a nice phrase that is used by Ted Green, who is, you know, considered to be, you know, a real champion for ancient trees, you know, heavily involved with the Ancient Tree Forum as the leader of that. So that's his phrase. A tree starts to grow down, and like I say, it describes that process where a tree starts to lose its canopy and becomes more broader in appearance. Hopefully you can see that from this diagram. So that's like the journey of a tree. And like I say, very few trees actually make it to the ancient phase, because it can take hundreds of years to actually reach that phase. So that's ancient trees. Now, veteran trees are kind of similar, but also very different. So first of all, it's very important to understand that the term veteran doesn't describe a life stage on the tree. So whilst the ancient phase is a life phase of that tree, the term veteran is not specifically a life stage. It describes a tree that displays sort of similar characteristics to an ancient tree, but it lacks the great age to be considered truly ancient for its species. So it will show a lot of the similar features, such as hollowing. It might have already started that retrenchment process. You know, you'll have like maybe some deadwood in the canopy. other features such as fungi, like heart rot fungi, wood pockets. So we're going to have a look at some ancient characteristics later on. But yeah, it's just to make the distinction between the two. And as a result of that, you know, we actually have far more trees on the inventory which are considered veteran than ancient. It's a much broader category. So at the minute we have about 14,500 ancient trees recorded to the ancient tree inventory. And the kind of key characteristics of them is that they're going to have a very large girth for their species. They're going to show retrenchment, and they're probably going to be hollow. We've put here, look for in commas, wow trees. So basically, if it's a tree that stops you in your tracks and makes you sort of look again, then you should definitely be recording it. And we've got a good slide coming up about ancient tree characteristics, so I'll press on to that. But just to compare that with veteran trees, I mentioned that we have more veterans than ancients recorded. At the minute, we have 110,000 veterans recorded so far. And again, these are ancient, or trees with ancient characteristics, but without the great age. And just, I suppose, just something to try and, a concept to try and get your head around is that by definition, all ancient trees are veteran, but not all veteran trees are ancient. So that's quite an important distinction, really. And an ancient tree may be veteran simply because of the condition features it shows and its great age. So these veteran trees can be thought of as being like survivors. I often use the analogy of like a war veteran. So that might be, if you can imagine someone who's been to war, who shows the kind of scars of hardship, the scars of war, but they're not necessarily old. So you know, they might still be a relatively young person, but still a veteran. So I think that's always quite a good analogy to fall back on when you're trying to think of what the term veteran means. Just to introduce the idea of notable trees as well. There are some trees that are perhaps locally very significant. They might not be veteran yet, but they're certainly maybe the next generation of veterans, or those trees that perhaps if you revisited in 30 or 50 years' time, they would be showing more veteran characteristics. And of course, we wouldn't want to see those trees lost either. And these can be very significant in the local area. So I can think of an example near me where I know there's a housing estate, and there's an absolutely huge mature beech that sits in the middle of this housing estate. Now, you know, there's no other trees like it in that surrounding area, and therefore it becomes like a notable tree that's worth mapping to the inventory. We have about 50,000 of those on the inventory at the moment. I would say they're probably not the primary focus of the ancient tree inventory. You know, we're most concerned with mapping ancient and veteran trees, because they're trees that provide immense habitat value in terms of the decaying wood. Ancient and veteran trees are very important for like rare saproxylic species. So saproxylic basically means something, or an organism that depends on dead wood for a part of its life scale, or its lifespan, sorry. So that's why we particularly want to record ancient veterans, but notable trees certainly deserve attention as well and deserve to be mapped. We talked about ancient and veteran characteristics, and on this slide, which I have pinched from the vet tree materials, this is sort of the tree that you'll never see in a way. It's almost too perfectly ancient, but it nicely shows all the different features that you might want to look for on an ancient tree. So we've already mentioned retrenchment, which you'll look for in the upper canopy. That's where the branches start to die back. You've also, as you work your way down the tree, you know, you can look for things like woodpecker holes. That's going to indicate hollowing branches if woodpeckers have been able to bore out a hole in the in the tree. There may be other cavities and water pockets across the tree as well. Again, they all create lots of microhabitats throughout the tree, making them sort of they're almost like an ecosystem of their own, really, with lots of different microhabitats. And that's again why they're so valuable from a wildlife point of view. Look for dead and hollowing branches. Some of them may still be attached to the tree. Some of them may have fallen off and they're beyond the ground as fallen deadwood that still continues to play a vital role in that deadwood habitat and for those organisms that depend on them. One of the big things to look for in ancient and veteran trees is a hollowing trunk, especially if you've got a tree that's visibly hollowing. So not all trees will be visibly hollow, but if you have a tree which has really hollowed out quite significantly, then it's definitely going to be worth recording, because that indicates great age because of the time it takes for those trees to hollow out. You can also look for things like burrs. We've already mentioned, trees with a large girth. Generally, ancient trees are going to become much more swollen and broad and gnarly, and you might even have areas where the bark has completely peeled off, and you've got patches of dead wood that appear that are great for wood-boring insects. One of the key organisms that drive the hollowing process are heart rot fungi or decomposer fungi that can grow as these very large brackets on the sides of the trunk, often quite low down, but also look for them in the branches too. And like I say, they play a vital role in that hollowing process because they're able to degrade the heartwood of a tree without degrading the outer sapwood. So those are some sort of ancient tree features to look for, and it's good to focus on looking for trees that exhibit at least some of these features. You might not see all of them, and you might not see a tree quite like this, only in very rare cases. But it might be if you have 2 or 3 of these features, that's going to indicate at least veteran status. So just to give another example there, that's more of a photographic example, if you like. So again, this tree is probably a bit more typical of what you're likely to find. So, and it shows that you have to look quite closely for some things, such as hollowing branches up in the canopy. It can be useful to have some binoculars with you sometimes. Here you can see that process of retrenchment happening, where you've got some decaying branches there visible, almost like as antler-like branches, I like to describe them as. And what else have we got? We've got some hollowing taking place in the trunk there. We've got some holes and water pockets. So, this tree is showing all the signs of being at least veteran. And I hope that's just a nice example. We've also got a photograph of retrenchment in action here as well, which is a little bit clearer to see. There you can see the bare antler-like branches in the top of the canopy as the tree is gradually starting to shed those and will over time become much broader in appearance. So we've mentioned that ancient and veteran trees are likely to be big. We're actually still discovering quite a lot of big trees. Just last year and the year before, we've discovered about 600 trees which are more than 6 meters in girth, which is still quite remarkable that we're still finding specimens like that. And like I say, Wales is quite under-recorded, so it may well be that there are some trees within your immediate local area that have not been mapped yet that are these kind of nice, huge sort of specimen trees. So how you can help us with recording to the Ancient Tree Inventory? Well, you can help us to record new trees. You can also add photos and comments to existing trees as well, because there are some records which are not complete yet and would benefit from extra photographs, or maybe even a check just to see if they're still there, to check they haven't fallen over or haven't been removed. So you can edit records as well and help us to update them. But whilst we're still discovering these big trees, it's really important to not forget about these sort of smaller species. So we're going to talk about species in just a moment, but I just wanted to share a collection here of images. We've got a rowan on the top left, a hawthorn on the right, and a sort of a lapsed hazel hedge on the bottom, just to show that not all ancient trees are large. And but what you can see from these is that they all show those kind of aging characteristics, that old look that is very relevant to their species. And over time, as you begin to record more, you start to get your eye in for what you're likely to spot on each species as well. So we've got some examples here. We've got top left an ancient field maple, again, which hasn't grown to a particularly large size, but shows that kind of gnarled look. And that actually on the other side of the tree, you can't quite see it from here, it's completely hollow on the other side. Ancient hawthorn on the top right. So this is a nice upland hawthorn that has been shaped by the wind as well. And again, they don't grow particularly big. You'd be lucky to find one much more in excess of 2.5 meters on a landscape like this. Probably more likely to find one a sort of 1.5 meter girth would be good in an upland environment. So you definitely have to take into account the sort of growing conditions and how that might have stunted the growth of the tree too. We've got a line of ancient alder in the bottom left, and on the bottom right we've got an ancient rowan tree. So ancient and veteran trees can take all sorts of wonderful forms as they become older, and it's also an indication of past management as well. So you can see this ancient alder in the bottom left may well have been managed deliberately as a line, perhaps as a land boundary in the past. So you're really looking for those trees that have been deliberately retained, I guess, that have kind of not been felled, or may have been deliberately retained for a certain reason. Maybe in the case of yew trees, in fact, Wales is fantastic for ancient yew, particularly in churchyards. And so, that's an example of a place where those trees have been deliberately retained through time. And it's always good to, when you're wanting to go out and find an ancient veteran tree, just kind of think, well, what sort of environments are likely to not have been disturbed for hundreds of years, and try and seek those trees out in those environments. So I mentioned the importance of species. Basically, different species have different life expectancies and different growth habits. So it means that some trees become ancient much earlier than others. In the case of yew trees, we define them as being ancient from around about 800 years of age. So that's quite an exceptional amount of time before we even class them as ancient. But that's because they're so long-lived and so slow growing. In fact, we have specimens of yew in the UK that may be in excess of 5,000 years old, which is absolutely remarkable. But it's rare to find trees of that immense age. In fact, some species may not even make it to 800 years. For example, we define hawthorn and rowan as being ancient from around about 175 years of age to 200 years of age. Oak, which is a very, very frequently recorded species, probably about 40% of our records are oak on the ATI, and they become ancient from around about 400 years of age. So these are not strict cut-off, and oak is not going to be celebrating its ancientness just after its 399th birthday, but they're sort of guidelines as to the kind of ages, like minimum age, that we expect these species to be ancient at. So, like I said before, we need to take into account environmental conditions as well. A tree growing in the Highlands of Scotland, let's say, for the sake of argument, an oak growing in the Highlands of Scotland is going to have a very different sort of suite of environmental circumstances to grow in compared to a nice big tree growing in a wood pasture parkland environment in Richmond Park in London. So the reason I say that is because it kind of affects how you might interpret this diagram on screen. This is a a guide that features in one of the ancient tree guides. This is in Ancient Tree Guide number 4. And it sets out an indication of likely girth sizes for different species, or commonly recorded species, and gives an indication of their likely ancient or veteran status. So, for example, if you found a sweet chestnut that's sort of over 5.5 meters in girth, then you're probably looking at a tree that's becoming potentially important for being ancient. You know, it's potentially entering that ancient stage. It means if you find an older that's 5 meters in girth, you can be fairly confident that it's ancient. In fact, it's likely to be one of the more older specimens of that species. So as you can see, some species really do not grow that big. A hawthorn, for example, that gets to 3.5 meters is a very rare thing to find. Whereas if you look taking 3.5 meters for an oak, that tree is only just becoming locally notable. So it's important to bear that in mind when looking for old trees, that how species affects the kind of expected size. I've also put on the screen just some examples of named trees in Wales. So we've got an oak on the top left, we've got a Scots pine on the top right, we've got on the bottom right here the pulpit yew, which has been sort of filled in with stone steps where you can actually walk all the way up, and there's actually a pulpit at the top where you can stand, and where sort of sermons have been delivered from that very tree. And we've got this example on the left, we've got the hugging birch. So again, very rare to see a birch that looks quite like that. That's a truly unique specimen, and I suppose that's the word to use, isn't it? It's unique. These trees are completely irreplaceable and completely unique in character. And that's why we want to map them. But it's just to kind of set some expectations here that actually, if you go out with a view to recording trees just like this, you might find that there are very few. So, you know, that I think that's always good to bear in mind. And that's why it's good to have maybe a copy of the girth guidelines with you when you go out, just to get a sense of what's worth recording. And we've actually put together some more guidance on each species on our website. So if you go to our how to record page and go on the species guides, you'll be able to click on those, and it gives you an idea of sort of expected girth sizes and yeah, an indication of age for each species. So I'd strongly recommend having a look at those afterwards. This next bit, we're going to look at actually how to record a tree to the website. So the best way is to go out and actually have a go yourself, to be honest, but hopefully this will give you some few pointers. So in order to record a tree, you need to first register with the website in the top right there, where it's highlighted in red. And once you've signed in, you can click on add a tree, and you'll be taken through a recording journey where you can add in the information that you've recorded for your tree. And if you want to see if the tree's already been recorded, or just want to browse the map of trees, you just need to click on the tree search area and here, and it'll take you to the interactive map. But yeah, just to reiterate, you need to be signed in first. So in order to add a tree, make sure you create an account and sign in. In terms of what we actually record, well, there's a group of essential information, and then there's a group of additional information. However, I'd start by saying it's really valuable if you can record as much as you possibly can. Because the more information we get about trees on the inventory, the more analysis we can do, and the more it just gives a more quality record, really, particularly if we can get things like photographs. In terms of what you need to record, though, you must record the location of the tree as an essential bit of information. You can do that via a grid reference, like a 10-figure grid reference. You can even get apps on your phone that will give you a 10-figure grid reference if you don't have a GPS, or you may just want to plot the tree manually when you get home using the map. You need to record the species of the tree. If you don't know the exact species, for example, if you can't decide whether it's a peduncular oak or a sessile oak, you can just record it as oak. But where possible, if you can get it down to species level, that's is preferred. You need to record the girth of the tree too, and I'll show you a few slides on that in a few moments. And also the access status, so whether it's on public or private land. It's really important to try and get some photographs of trees as well if you can, particularly showing the kind of ancient and veteran characteristics that are talked about at the sort of earlier slides of this presentation. Be good if you can record tree form as well. So is it a maiden tree? Is it a pollard? Is it a coppice? If you can tell us about the tree's condition. Again, if you can tell us if the tree's hollowing, if it's got hollowing branches, hollowing trunk, if you've got decay in the canopy, and if there's any fungi growing on the tree as well, you can tell us about that in the fungi section. There is a section about wildlife actually, which includes things like epiphytes. Epiphyte is basically something that, or a plant that grows above ground level. In this case, it might be like a moss or a lichen or a fern or even a cuckoo tree. So that's a tree that grows in the canopy of another tree. And there are also some fields about invertebrates and bats as well. So that's an overview of the kind of information that you can record. And we have got a recording form that you can print off, and it sort of guides you through this process. So it just prompts you when you're in the field, and you can then just sort of print it out and make some notes on it, and then come back and upload your trees via the website. So once you've clicked add a tree, your first page will be to plot the location of the tree. You can do one of two things. You can either put in a grid reference here in the search bar, and it'll zoom in on the tree location. And if you didn't want to do that and you know exactly where the tree is, one method is to switch to the satellite mode on the map. And you can see here we've got an orange crosshair in the center of the screen. Well, you can just sort of navigate the map so that the crosshair sits exactly where you want the tree to be, and then just click next, and then it plots it precisely there. Often for open grown trees, you can actually see the exact tree from the satellite image, so that can be really handy. But yeah, a 10-figure grid reference should be accurate, particularly sort of, I don't know, between like a 6 to 10 meter sort of radius. So that's how you record location. Like I say, you might have a GPS, or you might want to use a mobile app for a phone. There are lots of free ones out there that can record a 10-figure grid reference, and it will even tell you the accuracy of that record. So that's really handy to know about. The next page is the species page. So as I said before, if you don't know the exact species, it's handy if you can get it to at least genus level. So for example, you could click into oak, where we've got 13 species of oak there, including our 2 native species. We've actually got over sort of 230 species that you can record to the Ancient Tree Inventory, but about 88%, I think, fall into just 10 species. So they're the more common ones, like oak and ash and yew and beech and alder, sweet chestnut. So you can type in the name, or you can click on one of these and it will take you through to the options. And that's how you add the species. The next step is to measure the girth of the tree. So you actually need to do 2 things here. You need to measure the girth itself, but also the height at which you took the girth measurement on the tree, because that's quite important. I'll explain why in a moment. But you're basically aiming to record the narrowest girth measurement, either at or below 1.5 meter height from the ground. So you shouldn't need to record above 1.5 meter height. So that's chest height for a lot of people. But you can record lower if you need to. And like I say, you're really looking for that narrowest measurement that you can get. A few diagrams here just to make a few notes on recording girth. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if every tree looked like the one on the left, where you could walk all the way around the tree without any problems, and you could neatly get your tape measure to fit around that single stem. Often in the case of ancient trees, this is quite a rarity, because ancient trees fragment and they split out, and they can form other like sucker trees that grow off inside, and you sometimes get multi-stems. It can become quite complex, but in theory, if you've got a maiden tree, it should be a case of just recording the girth at 1.5 meters. In some cases, though, you might have to avoid some low branches. So in this case on the right, you would perhaps record at maybe 1 meter height from the ground, just to make sure you were getting the narrowest girth that you could. It's the same with burrs as well. So if you've got a tree that's got a lot of burrs that are growing on the side of the trunk, you want to try and go, again, find the narrowest girth you can that's maybe sits between those burrs. And a lot of it is trial and error, to be honest. You just have to persevere slightly and maybe try to take the girth multiple times just to try and get it recorded in the right place. In the case of coppice trees, which are worth a mention, it's best to not record at 1.5 meter height. You actually want to record around the base, but probably only maybe 30 centimeters from the ground. It's better to record the coppice stool itself rather than go around the whole branches. So we've got notes on this on our website as well. We've got recording guidance and a handy PDF that you can download, which has a lot of this in diagram form. So if you ever need a quick reference to where you should be recording girth, then that's there. Just a few extra pointers. If you've got a tree that's on a slope, then you want to be recording from the upward side of the slope, not least from a health and safety point of view, but it's just a bit more accurate in terms of trying to find what we call like the waistline of a tree. So always record on the upward side of the slope if you can. And if you've got a tree that leans, it's best to go sort of, if you like, perpendicular to the trunk. So you want to make sure you're getting that narrowest girth you can. So kind of record with the angle of the tree rather than recording as this red X is showing. So that's an introduction to recording girth of the trees. And of course, if you've got multi-stem trees, then you may want to record lower down, particularly if the tree seems to join fairly low down, or if the tree sort of splits above 1.5 meters, then you can perhaps just measure the main stem. But yeah, it's multi-stems that are the trickier ones to record, I have to say. It's just ultimately, if you have struggled to record the girth, just make sure that in the comments you describe how you recorded the girth of the tree, and when we come to looking from a data analysis point of view, we can take that into account. The next page to record is public access. So we've got a host of options here. You just need to select the right one. For example, is it public access, or is it private and not visible from public access at all? Would you need permission to view that tree? So it's very handy if you can tell us that information too. And it's actually a mandatory field, so it won't let you proceed without selecting one of these. The next stage is you add the photographs. That doesn't really need an explanation. You just simply drag and drop your images or choose where they are, and you'll be able to upload them and put a caption in. In terms of what to photograph, well, it's best to look at the ancient and veteran tree characteristics. As I said earlier in the talk, we've got some examples on the screen there. And we've actually got a dedicated web page about taking photos that you can find in our recording guidance as well. Now it then brings you up with a summary page, but you're not quite done yet, because there's a section called additional details where you can put even more information about the tree. So that would include things like we mentioned earlier: tree form, tree condition, wildlife information about the tree as well, and also any details about threats. We've got some guidance on tree form on our website. But here are some examples of where, you've got a pollard on the top left, a coppice on the bottom right. In these cases, these are more like lapsed examples of their form. So you've really got like a lapsed pollard here and a lapsed coppice. It's not, these aren't trees that have been recently pollarded or recently coppiced. But it's very, very important to record trees like this, because they're those trees that have signs of historical management. And in the case of pollards, they may have been deliberately retained for quite a long time. And it's worth saying that pollards, if you were to compare a pollard and a maiden tree of the same species, of the same girth, well, chances are the pollard would be the older one, because the effect that pollarding has on the tree is it means that it kind of stunts the growth of that tree. So in other words, it's not going to be growing at the same rate as a maiden, which is kind of, you might assume it to be more or unrestrained. A pollard will take this form of being cut fairly high up, and you'll often see several stems that all converge to the same point on the bole, or about 2 or 3 meter height on the trunk. And there's some fantastic examples of historic pollards that are really, really worth recording, particularly in managed landscapes, in historic wood pastures and parkland. It's also, when you're recording condition information, as we said earlier, take the time to look up and down the tree, take a step back from the tree, maybe get close to the tree and just walk the whole way around, looking for those ancient and veteran features. In terms of epiphytes and fungi, I'd say record those if they're visible and prominent. You're much more likely to find trees that are sort of a bit more saturated in lichens and moss than you are where I live in the middle of England. So that's partly due to slightly lower levels of ammonia in the atmosphere, and slightly wetter conditions as well all help. So look for those ancient and veteran trees that have lots of moss and lichens and ferns and cuckoo trees and fungi as well. Record those if they're prominent. So once you've done all that, you're then ready to click Submit Record, and you just click the orange button, and it basically then adds it as an unverified tree. You can always double check on your trees by, if you click on your name in the top right and go on a drop down menu that says My Trees, it will open up all of the trees that you've recorded. And you can click on each one, and you can see which ones need verification, because it will say this text at the top, pending verification in red. And it says the tree won't be publicly displayed until it's been verified. Okay, so, and that kind of ends the recording journey. And that has hopefully given you a crash course overview of what you need to do to add trees to the Ancient Tree Inventory. As I say, it's a fantastic project, and without people adding trees in the local area, we wouldn't have been able to build this database. So incredibly grateful for those of you who hopefully will feel inspired after this and want to go find some trees to record. I've got my contact details on screen there. So if you want to get in touch with me, it's ancienttreeinventory@woodlandtrust.org.uk. We're going to try and answer any questions that have come in through the chat or that you might have on the back of this talk. But any that don't get answered, we will try to answer in like a Q&A document, or you can feel free to get in touch with myself via this email address, and I'll do my best to respond in a timely manner. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, folks, and happy tree hunting. I hope that was useful, and you have a bit more of an idea of what you'll be looking for now in ancient and veteran trees. And look forward to seeing the records flooding in, hopefully. I think what we'll do now is we'll take some questions, if that's all right. I know we've had some chats going on, and I'll just sort of familiarise myself a bit with those. If you bear with me.
Writing them down, Tom. So did you want me to ask those on behalf of?
Oh yes, please. Yes, if you've already filtered down the questions and got a nice list, that'd be fantastic, Ben. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll just start with the two at the very bottom because I haven't written those down. Sandy asks about the presentation and will it be made available? Yes, we're recording it and it will appear on the Biodiversity Information Service YouTube channel at some point, and I'm not sure whether you'll upload it to your Woodland Trust site somehow. Tom, do you have a place to put talks like this? So there'll be one possibility, maybe two, if you can upload it to your Woodland Trust site.
Yeah, we don't have a place to host those at the moment, but certainly I think if it's at least hosted on the BIS website, and if there was a way to make the actual presentation itself available to everyone as well, or if anyone would benefit from a copy, then by all means just get in touch with me by email. I can send you a copy if it'd be useful to have the slides to hand without having to listen to the whole talk again.
Yeah, I think if we send it out as a PDF version.
Yes.
Good. And also, Heather just asked about data sharing. I don't think we do data sharing at the moment, but inspired by this event, we have talked about it. And yes, it is possible, and we will be doing that. So the LERC in Wales, the LERC in Wales will get the ancient tree inventory data, which will be really great. And we've also looked at some of the records, so we can look at some of the records of trees that we have here in Wales, in Aderyn, the All Wales database that I talked about. And if there's any with comments such as ancient or veteran or very old or something like that, we can maybe flag those up and look at ways how we might get those checked, possibly with new recorders such as yourselves, to maybe go and visit those trees and just to see whether they are actually ancient or veteran trees, given the criteria that Tom's just spoke about. So that's one question answered. Okay, a couple of questions on measuring. Claire was asking about getting a long enough tape measure to measure some of these veterans, which might be what, 7-8 meters. The best ones I imagine are the kind of dressmakers tapes that are really flexible, but I've only seen them in what, 1.5 meters. So do you have a good place to buy big tape measures?
Yeah, so the best ones to use is it's like a surveyor's tape. So it's one, and I'm unprepared. I should have had one to hand so I could have sort of showed it on screen. But it's basically like a disc with like a handle that where you can wind in the tape, and it will have like a hook on the end. Normally they're about 10 meters in length. Some maybe even 15 meters, and you can get them from most DIY stores. You can also get them on Amazon as well. They're typically about sort of 10 to 15 pounds. There are some which are very expensive, if those that might be used by a professional arborist, might be in the region of 70 to 80 pounds. But most of our recorders and verifiers tend to use, the ones that you can get in your local hardware stores, like B&Q, or like I say, even online, Amazon. It shouldn't cost you too much. And so 10 meters is what you should be aiming for, really. And that will cover most trees. If you need to go slightly more than that, then I guess you just have to sort of stop and add a bit on. But you probably be rare to find trees in excess of 10 meters. If you were finding those, that would be, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. And Kerry mentioned about measuring old hedge banks. I'm not sure whether she means old hedge bank trees and how you would measure those.
Yeah, it's a good question. I also wish I had a picture to hand, but hedge banks can be a bit trickier, and they're probably one of the most trickiest forms to measure the girth of. It really depends on the form of the tree. I suppose you're really looking for those trees which are described as lapsed hedgerows. So those trees that used to be part of a hedge that are now no longer managed as part of a hedge, but they've grown into a kind of an unusual and distorted shape. They're typically going to have like a horizontal, almost like a horizontal bar of trunk with stems that come up. And I suppose really it would be best to try and record, if you can look at the base of the tree, if you can try and find like the main root plate of that particular lapsed hedge, and you know, try and record maybe a meter from the roots up. It'd be much better with a diagram, I think, or a photograph to explain. But all you can really do is record what you see at the end of the day, and you'd really be looking to record the largest part, you know, the oldest part of the tree, if you like, because at the end of the day, that's why we record girth, is to try and get a sense of the size of the oldest bit of the tree. So, and with hedge bank trees, it's slightly irrelevant to compare the girth anyway. I mean, the comparing girth measurements of trees is much better for maiden trees, or, you know, if you're comparing maiden with maiden, or if you're comparing pollard with pollard. With something like a multi-stem tree, you know, the annual growth rings of a tree are not that well represented in one single stem. That growth is actually split across several different stems. And so, you know, measuring the girth really for the ATI for hedge bank trees is more of a formality than meaningful data, I think, in most cases. It's similar with wood bank trees, where you get perhaps like a line of trees in a raised wood bank that have grown quite close together, often in a kind of so like a multi-stem form. And again, it's a case of recording what you see, really. Every lapsed hedgerow tree is going to be unique. But if in doubt, just try and record the largest part, largest single stem, and always make a note in the comments of where you've recorded the girth as well, because that can just help us understand where you recorded it, basically. But no, it's a very good question.
Thanks for that, Tom. I hope that answers Kerry's question. Maybe if not, maybe you can post in the chat or unmute and ask us to confirm, but hopefully that answers your question. Thanks for that, Tom. Miranda also asked about the girth and what size that would be in a willow. I guess there's several willow species, so maybe it varies a little bit, but it wasn't in the chart. So is there a kind of a girth for an ancient willow?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you're right. Willow isn't one of those species that we've created guidance for at the moment. We could do with some more data on willow, to be honest, but it's a tough one because a lot of old willow seems to be managed as pollards. So you've got to remember that the girth is going to be slightly smaller compared to a maiden of the same age. But typically sort of 3 to 3.5 meter plus would be getting on for, you know, significant for willow. And I'd say probably don't get too hung up on the girth sizes when you're looking for ancient and veteran trees. It's much better to look for those trees with the condition features, really, because I'm just thinking of pictures of willows that I've seen that are not huge. In the example of like phoenixed willow or pollarded willow, that is often quite low down, like low and sprawling. Not that big in girth, like I say, 3 to 3.5 meters, but might still show all of those like hollowing characteristics that we talked about. It's worth saying willow is often associated with wet environments as well. If you've got a tree which is close to a riverbank, that might accelerate the aging process slightly and cause that tree to decay a bit earlier because of the sort of wet conditions. So yeah, willow you wouldn't expect it to be huge. You know, you certainly wouldn't be finding many 5 meter, 6 meter, 7 meter examples. Those are like national rarities. You're looking more for the 3 to 4 meter mark for like notable and veteran, and then ancient willow. Yeah, no, very good question.
I suppose that as well just reinforces the fact that ancient veteran trees aren't always big, huge trees. So the size of them isn't always the thing to look for. So
yeah, exactly.
Thanks for that. I noticed that the age chart that you showed in the talk was put in the chat. So if you did want to download that age chart, Laura, who works for Woodland Trust here in Wales, has popped that into the chat, so have a look at that and you can open the file and save it onto your computer. So thanks for that, Laura. And Miranda, who asked about the willow, also asked about information on tools to record ancient trees. I assume she means the website information that you went through, and I guess that's something that the Woodland Trust set up.
Yeah, so in terms of like extra recording guidance, you mean, or?
I'm not sure, maybe Miranda.
Yeah. I'm
just reading what I've written down, and possibly tools, like you say, the recording system, or maybe tools such as the tape measure and a pair of binoculars and that kind of thing. So I guess we've covered all that, but maybe Miranda, if you want any more clarification, then let us know, or maybe get in touch by email.
Yeah, you can't hear me, I guess, can you?
Oh, I can now, yeah. Hi, Miranda.
Yeah, it's more logging the site of the tree. So you were saying you can use the GPS data of a phone. I tried doing that and I noticed that there was a big difference between what my phone said and what my car measurement said. And I was thinking, oh, that's not going to be accurate enough.
Yeah, it's a good question. So you've all, between different devices, you're always going to get slight, difference in the exact reading, particularly if it's a 10-figure grid reference. I use an app on my phone that's called GPS OS, basically. So it's GPS and then a space OS, and that tells you the accuracy of the girth measurement as well. So it'll say whether it's accurate to 6 meters or whether it's accurate to 30 meters or if it's accurate to 100 meters. And sometimes you just have to stand in one place and give it a minute just to find itself. Obviously, it's partly dependent on your signal strength as to where you stood. But the best thing to do is to sort of take a grid reference, and then when you input it to the website, you can kind of hop over to the satellite view, and then you can always manually tweak the position of the tree when you're recording it. So I don't know if you remember the orange crosshair that we saw on that diagram that appears on the map. You can sort of tweak the position of that and plot it manually. So that will help with the accuracy of recording the location of the trees. But in terms of tools, yeah, I'd say a mobile phone is actually a very good tool to have, because from there, you've got a system for recording the grid reference. You've got a system for recording the photograph of a tree as well. And actually, I didn't mention this in the talk, but it is actually possible to record to the Ancient Tree Inventory website from your phone. So the mobile is the website is mobile friendly, and you can go through all that recording process there and then, and it will zoom to your location. So you just click like the button, there's like a blue dot button, and it zooms to where you are on the map, so that you can plot the tree there. So that can help. But in terms of you kind of what's in your backpack, it's probably going to be a tape measure, like the 10-meter surveyor's tape that we mentioned. Probably going to have a mobile phone. It can be useful to have either a notebook, or if you can print out one of our recording forms, then you use a bit of pen and paper as well, just to make any notes. That's really it, to be honest. That's all you should need. But you might want other things. You might want like a weather writer or a clipboard, depending on how much of a day of it you're going to make. So yeah, generally it's quite low tech. And if you have a smartphone, then it can really help. Obviously, if you didn't have a smartphone, what you can do is just simply print out a screenshot of the area that you intend to visit. If you can print out a satellite map or an OS map, and just plot the tree manually on a bit of paper, and then when you get back to the computer, you can punch it in via the website, basically. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question about.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm hoping I can log my trees here in Germany, even though it might be a British woodlands site, but I noticed that European trees are also being noted, so hopefully I can put those in too.
Yes, well, you're right. The Ancient Tree Inventory primarily has a UK focus because it's a project that started in the UK. However, I've also spotted that I think you can tell where a few keen ancient tree recorders have been on holiday, because there are a few that appear across Europe. And so yeah, I mean, there's nothing stopping you adding trees in Germany at all. It's not something that people have specifically tried to do, but why not? I think let's go global. I agree.
I also noticed, Miranda, on the iRecord app, I don't know if you know about that app for recording wildlife, that there's quite a few records in Europe on there as well. So even though that's kind of aimed at the UK, you can log sightings in anywhere in the world, maybe. I know certainly there's some in Europe. So have a look at the iRecord app as well.
I'll check it out. Thank you.
Which you can also find online as well. Thanks for that question. Thanks, Tom, for the answer. I think that's it for the questions. There's a couple of others. I have the OS map grid referencing tool I use on Android phone. I find that really useful and really accurate. And then Laura also mentions the what 3 words, which narrows every single 3 meter square area down to a 3-word code. So that might be another useful thing to use to get an accurate location. I learned some new terms as well, so thanks, Tom. I never heard of a cuckoo tree before, so that was new to me. I know exactly what you mean. And also, yeah, the fact that Wales is very under-recorded for a lot of species, and that obviously that includes ancient and veteran trees as well. So hopefully today's event has encouraged you to go out there and search for those trees and log them on the Ancient Tree Inventory. I noticed in the chat that a few people are feeling guilty having not done that, having come across them in the past, and are keen to get out there and start reporting. So hopefully we will find some more ancient trees to plot on the map in Wales, and possibly a good place to start would be in churchyards, and you often find new trees associated with churchyards, so they're a good start. And of course they're probably one of the oldest trees that you're going to find in Wales and in the rest of the UK as well. So have a look in your local churchyard and have a look at the trees in there as well. I just had a question, maybe the last one as we wrap up, it's 5:15. How would you distinguish retrenchment, where the tree starts growing down, from a dangerous tree? Is there ways to kind of tell the difference between those two?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And yeah, I guess this is one that comes up a lot, and it's partly a matter of perspective, I guess, whether you're looking at the tree from a health and safety point of view, or whether you're looking at it from a wildlife and habitat point of view. So yeah, it's fairly common to see those sort of veteran trees that are starting to show hollowing branches are often those that are cut back, particularly depending on the tree's location. If you've got a veteran tree that's, say, on a country lane, on a hedgerow, and you've got a nice hollow branch that's resting over the road, then chances are that tree is going to be, chopped back. But in terms of distinguishing between what's a tree that's just been pruned, that might have pruning wounds, and what's a tree that's naturally retrenched. Well, a tree that's sort of been more managed is going to have more like a clean cut on the branches. If you've got a tree that's sort of naturally retrenching and the dead wood's fallen off, that dead wood is going to fracture more, and it's going to split. So it's not going to snap off in a nice clean motion. You can tell the difference between a tree that's been lopped due to a chainsaw and a tree that's sort of naturally just buckled under its own weight. So I guess it's looking for that kind of like frayed wood, looking for split wood and fractures, and you'll see as you look up into the canopy, there'll be some branches that perhaps still have their bark actually still hanging off the branch, and some bits of exposed wood. So yeah, I think the retrenchment is one that you really have to, I think you have to see some good examples of trees to really get your eye in for it. And we're really looking for those trees which are where it's naturally retrenched. So it's not always going to have a significant amount of dead wood. In fact, it's harder to spot if that dead wood has already fallen off the tree and might be on the ground. So, but typically you might be looking for it'll be the smaller branches that you'll spot in a retrenched tree. They'll also typically be towards the upper end of the canopy, so you'll see them sticking out the top of the tree. Whereas if you've got a tree that's been pruned back, then maybe it's more likely to be the lower branches that have been pruned off, because it's those that are perhaps posing more of a health and safety risk. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question, but probably one that's best served with some photos or real examples, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, just one last point. Ruth was asking about where you might report felled trees. And that possibly links in with you asked about anything in motion to legally protect trees in woodland. And I know Laura, who works for the Woodland Trust, different Laura's, posted something again in the chat about what the Woodland Trust are doing on protection for ancient trees. So if you have a look at the web link there, I'll just copy it and I'll post it with the kind of last comment.
Yeah, it's in regard to the oaks that were planted at the end of the World War II to commemorate King George VI Agriculture Fund. And there was 9 oaks planted in the King George VI playing fields in Brecon by the side of the theatre. And somebody has put on the local community page that one of them has been felled. And we were just wondering, is there, would there be a preservation order on those trees because of the historical significance of them being planted?
Potentially so, yes. So the tree preservation or TPO register is something that local authorities will manage. So you should be able to go onto your local council's planning section, where you'll be able to pull up a map of trees that have TPOs plotted.
Right.
And we can actually record the presence of a TPO within the ancient tree inventory data, but not every. That's not really been done consistently, because if you're a record who's added a tree, you might not necessarily know that tree has a TPO on it. So it's best to check with the, like say, the local authority register rather than the ancient tree inventory. However, if you've got a historic tree which is under threat, the best thing to do is first of all check whether it's mapped, and if it's not, add it to the ancient tree inventory. What that means is it provides vital information for our campaigns team, who will then use that to, when they're challenging a decision to fell a tree. Let's say if you've got a planning or a housing development, for example, and there are some ancient and veteran trees that look like they're going to be chopped as a result of the development, then our campaigns team might be able to submit comments against the application to, encourage the developers to honour the National Planning Policy Framework, which is basically a sort of a guideline for development. It doesn't completely protect trees with legal protection, but it strongly advises developers to not fell or harm, and to consider the impacts on the root protection area for ancient and veteran trees. So adding it to the ancient tree inventory gives our campaigns team that vital background information, so that they can say, here's the link to the tree, here's where it's plotted, here's why it's ancient. They can then cite the National Planning Policy Framework statement. And in some cases, that can actually save the tree, because, or at least, create some intervention by which that tree is, the development doesn't have as big an impact on that tree, I guess. So yeah, if you've got a tree under threat, we have got a web link, like a page on the main Woodland Trust site, where you can report a threatened tree. But also, if you want to send it across to me directly via the ancient tree inventory inbox, then you can do so. Okay. I get quite a few reported to me as well.
Because unfortunately, it has been felled.
Okay.
Yeah, and so if you took a photograph of that, perhaps send it across to you then.
Yeah. So what we can do as well on the inventory is we can update records to being lost. So in that case, if you had an ancient tree that has been felled and removed, we'll then update that to it being a lost record.
Yeah.
So over time, that will give us a stronger indication of loss rates of ancient trees.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. That's a good question.
Yeah. It's, as I say, it's only brought to our notice just recently. Somebody said, "Why is this tree being felled?" And the reason why I'm inquiring, because I've got close connections with those trees, because I work for the organisation where the trees represent, which was the Red Cross and the St John's Ambulance, who were the main fundraisers for the Agricultural Fund just after the war for the King George VI. And of course, each tree represents $1 million that was raised, and because he made a pledge of 9 million to raise to rejuvenate the Agricultural Fund after the Second World War. There's also the same trees planted in Llandrindod Wells up by the lake, and there's a commemorative plaque as well at the base of one of the trees. You know, just say.
So technically, how many is in it? Like 4?
Sorry.
I think someone might have added a comment. I didn't quite catch it.
Well, apparently they did check to see the trunk that had been fallen, if it's like been rotted or whatever, and it seems to be in perfectly good health.
I noticed in the chat, Ruth, that Claire had posted a website address for Powys, the local council, with advice on trees. So have a look at that as well, and maybe you might be able to find out the reasons why that particular tree was felled.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Thanks for that question. Okay, I think we'll wrap up now. That's all the questions that I can see. Thanks very much, Tom. That was brilliant to find out all about ancient veteran trees and the trees to look out for. I was chatting with Laura, who works for the Woodland Trust in Wales, and it's something we've talked about. We possibly look at running a follow-up field trip.
Yes.
In this area, so in Powys, National Park somewhere. Hopefully this year. I know organised group activities are allowed now in Wales, so it's maybe something we'll look out for. So have a look on our event, and I'll email everyone who's attended and booked onto the course today. And that might be something that you want to get involved in, so you can actually go and look at some ancient trees. With Paul Keane, who lives next door to me almost, and also maybe with Laura as well. So yeah, that'd be good to try and do a follow-up event, actually going out and looking and recording ancient trees. And you get to see it actually happening in person rather than on screen. So do look out for that as well. So I hope that's inspired you all to look at trees a little bit differently and maybe a little bit longer, and try and find some of the features and add them to the ancient tree inventory as well. That'd be really good to try and get some more ancient and veteran trees in Wales logged on the map there. Okay, lots of good comments in the chat thanking us. So thanks from me to you, Tom, for coming along this afternoon and giving us that really interesting talk. And I'm sure we'll keep in touch and swap some records and data, which will be great. And I think, well, normally I say good night, but I can say have a good rest of the evening and enjoy the rest of the day, and hope to see you soon at our other events. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Happy tree hunting. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it.
Good luck, everyone, with your ancient tree inventory hunting.